also allows the Secretary of State to cap profits of children's home providers, ending the obscene scandal of local authorities forced to shell out huge sums of money to private providers. And finally, I just want to urge that this ambitious and important bill is backed up by even further investment in areas that will improve children's well-being. We need more money for children and adolescent mental health services, for children's social care, and to tackle child poverty.
Anna Sabine.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I'm actually standing up to talk about the important issue of school uniform, but I would just like to say that the member for Nottingham East was quite right to point out that child sexual abuse takes place across our society. We've just seen the Archbishop of Canterbury and others in the Church of England resigning over child sexual abuse, and for the member for Clacton to deny that it affects all aspects of society is really for the birds, frankly. On school uniform, I'm a single parent to 2 teenagers, and like many other parents in this place, I know how many expenses are involved in sending children to school. As they grow and progress through school, they require different pairs of shoes, sets of stationery, and money for school trips. State schools should represent a level playing field for children of all backgrounds, where pupils are treated with the same respect and given the same opportunities. I recognise that school uniform allows pupils to go into school with the same appearance and not be discriminated against or bullied for what they wear. However, school uniform is one of the biggest costs in sending children to school, and while I welcome the government's commitment to limiting the number of branded items students are required to have each year, I think that more needs to be done to support parents during the cost of living crisis when they're already facing higher energy bills and food costs. From my experience of sending my daughter to state school, branded school uniform items are being sold for an inflated price from monopoly suppliers compared to those items bought from high street shops and charity shops. This bill talks about restricting schools to 3 branded items of uniform, which, by the way, I don't read as excluding primary schools from letting kids wear ties, but anyway. The bare minimum of 3 branded items of a jumper, a polo shirt and a skirt for my daughter's school costs over double that than from a high street shop. For a family with 3 children to have 2 sets of 3 branded items per year costs over £300 compared to £108 from my local supermarket in Frome, nearly 3 times as much. This doesn't even account for a sports kit and shoes, or for the fact that children often require new items each year as they grow. There are also parts of my constituency of Frome and East Somerset which operate a 3-tier school system, meaning children move around 3 different schools with 3 different uniforms before they're 16. This can mean that parents have to adapt to 3 totally different uniforms, colours and requirements. We should aim to strike a balance between students looking smart and not making uniforms overly complicated and exclusive. The more simple the uniform, which is based on staple and easily available items and colours, the more reusable. We should foster an environment where school clothes can be easily handed down through families, regardless of gender, and exchanged between families, either through the school or through charity shops, instead of focusing on brand new items for each child. This also reduces clothing and textile waste. I would ask the Minister to consider, for example, why 3 items was chosen rather than perhaps 1. A school tie or jumper, which makes students easily identifiable as from a particular school, but which leaves maximum options for parents to buy the other uniform elements from other retailers. Or indeed, what other additional measures could be taken to keep down the cost of uniform. Kitting a child out for a new term at school is an expensive business, and anything the government can do to support parents in keeping these costs down would be most welcome.
Jake Richards.
Madam Deputy Speaker, this bill is an important moment. For many decades, children's social care has been overlooked and afterthought for government, and over the last 30 years, politicians of all different colours have too often failed the most vulnerable children in this country, the children who are unable to be looked after by their own family. And I'm delighted that this Education Secretary and her team have put these children at the heart of this piece of legislation. It's a testament to her personal commitment to social justice and fairness. The statistics on outcomes for children in care and the risks of exploitation are well known. They represent 1% of the child population, but 37% of those in youth justice. Just 15% of those looked after children receive GCSEs from C to A star, compared to the national average of 55%. But, Madam Deputy Speaker, I want to focus on the child placement estate, which is a more dry topic. But if we do not provide sufficient and safe accommodation for these children, then the rest is frankly broadly redundant. And I have personal experience of this. Before being elected as an MP, I was a barrister, often working in child protection law, and many Friday afternoons would be spent in court seeking orders on an urgent basis for removal of children from their primary carer before the weekend. My work would be done upon judgment being given and my drafting of the order, but for my social work team, their work had only just started. They would have to collect the children, often relying upon the police to assist, and then often late in the evening, the arduous task of attempting to find suitable accommodation for these children would begin. Calls late into the night pleading with reluctant foster carers or residential units to take young people, who would often sit obediently at the local authority offices waiting for their fate to be decided. I have known of incidents whereby children slept on the floors of such offices while searches were being undertaken. It's a complete disgrace about the lack of sufficient accommodation in this country. And, Madam Deputy Speaker, the government cannot say that they were not warned about this. In 2022, the High Court sent a judgment, took the unusual step of sending a judgment to the relevant ministers, raising the issue about the lack of appropriate accommodation for such children. If I can just find my place in my speech.
The honourable member gives way.
I'm very grateful.
Very grateful that the honourable member has given way. Does he agree with me that provisions in the bill for measures such as regional care cooperatives that would agglomerate services, bring them together across local authorities to do some of this commissioning, recruiting and building of children's homes would help with the problems that he's describing?
I'm very grateful to my honourable friend, and his review before being elected to this place raised some of the provisions which are now in this legislation. He should be praised for that review. Madam Deputy Speaker, the High Court, as I was saying, raised this issue in 2020. They took the unusual step of sending a judgment to the relevant government ministers, setting out, quote, the nationwide problem of demand outstripping supply and accommodation. The facts of that case show the human cost of a lack of investment and strategy. A 15-year-old girl from a family unable to care for her had been moved 14 different placements in 12 months. None were suitable. She had repeatedly fled unregulated accommodation units and was deemed to be a serious risk of self-harm and sexual exploitation. And Madam Deputy Speaker, those who raise the important issue of child sexual exploitation but have shown no interest in children's care services should hang their head in shame for trying to make political points of this very, very important issue. Now, this bill takes important steps in this regard, and my right honourable friend for Whitehaven and Workington has already raised the important introduction of regional cooperation, which will certainly add capacity. There is also, however, as has already been raised, the financial backdrop to this issue, and I no doubt that ministers will be making representations to the Chancellor about the estimated £6.2 billion funding gap for local authorities and social care. But, Madam Deputy Speaker, it's not just about money. Whilst capacity is undoubtedly required, the system also needs national and local leadership and a national and local strategy. There remains, despite this very welcome bill, a lack of a comprehensive and national plan for care placements. There is a lack of an overarching assessment of how this market will fulfil the functions necessary in the years and decades ahead. Bluntly, we will still not know what is needed and where from across the nation. And we know from experience that the market will not do it for us. We have learnt that lesson already. There needs to be an accurate assessment of the need in the sector, the types of placement, the number and location of care settings across the country. There needs to be a funding strategy. Madam Deputy Speaker, my private member's bill provides for a modest change in this area, simply requiring for all local authorities to think ahead, to have a plan for types of placements they are able to offer, and a strategy for where they will need to be based on an assessment of the need of the demand. Whilst there is a requirement in the guidance, there now needs to be a statutory responsibility for local authorities to think ahead in this area, because at the moment, the issue is not merely about capacity, but where the accommodation is. More than a fifth of children in care live more than 20 miles from their home, with one account given of a child being placed over 500 miles from her community. These are young lives being separated from their community, their brothers and sisters, friends and teachers, with all the associated damage to their relationships and education. And this problem has increased by over 50% since 2019. So I hope that the government will properly consider the modest suggestion that local authorities should simply have a sufficiency plan for where to place these children. Madam Deputy Speaker, I'll briefly touch upon one final aspect, which is about the identifier of children. This is a really useful and important step to safeguard children, but I hope ministers will have discussions on a cross-departmental basis with the Home Office, as well as the Department of Health, about working regarding the development of digital ID and patient passports in those areas as well. Thank you, Madam.
Rebecca Smith.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Clause 7 of this bill, Stay in Close Support, builds on the previous Conservative government's Stable Homes Built on Love strategy, in particular the pledge to strengthen the Stay in Close offer and provide a statutory basis for it. So therefore I welcome the commitment to this within the bill, in particular the requirement of local authorities to provide suitable accommodation for formerly looked after children well into childhood. At an event last year, which was also attended by the Minister for Children, the member for Lewisham East, who's no longer in the room, I had the privilege to co-host, and we heard from 4 young people, Tahir, Bella, William and Jess, who have all been supported by Home for Good and Safe Families in supported lodgings. Now, supported lodgings is where you stay with a family who provide you with life skills, essentially. There's more to it, I can explain another time, but that's the basics of it. And all of these young people shared powerful stories of how living within a household had enabled them to pursue education and work and given them a place to call home and in some cases, as one of them described, a second family. So how can supported lodgings help with the aims of staying close in this bill? Well, in October 2024, a report was published, The Voices of Supported Lodgings, which the 4 young people I've mentioned worked on. And it found that every staying close support category that is listed in the bill has been proven to be provided by supported lodgings. Health and wellbeing, 84% of the young people reported that supporting lodging feels like home. Relationships, 89% had a good relationship with their host. Education, employment and training, young people in supported lodgings are 8% more likely to be in education and employment or training than other care leavers. And participation in society, 90% of these young people felt more confident in their ability to live independently. And don't forget, these are looked after children. These are children who've spent a considerable amount of time in care. Therefore, would the government amend the bill to specifically reference supported lodgings provision as a high-quality example of the stay-in-close support that local authorities could provide for local care leavers? And with this, will they commit to provide the ability for local authorities to develop supported lodgings in their area through recruitment and the training of hosts? Now, a further point around staying close in particular. For some young, formerly looked after people, private rented accommodation may actually be the choice of where they wish to live. However, without family to support them in securing a deposit or even acting as a guarantor, will the government seek to extend the role of local authorities as corporate parents to require them to facilitate a rent deposit and guarantor scheme for looked after children? I want to also touch, though, in my contribution today on homeschooling. Now, I didn't get homeschooled, and I don't always think it's the best option, but for many, it's the choice that they have made for their children. But it feels like this bill is using a hammer to crack a nut. Now, I fully appreciate the risk of children going missing from education and that homeschooling can be used for inappropriate reasons. But many parents, including many in my constituency who've written to me, have opted to home educate and are doing an excellent job and are deeply concerned, though, at the proposed over-regulation that they face in this bill.
My honourable friend,
yes, I will.
I'm grateful to my honourable friend. I too had a number of representations from constituents who are concerned about what is the purpose behind this? What additional information does it elicit to the local authority when actually a proper education is being received? Does she agree with me that some clarity is required there? Otherwise it just seems an unnecessary and intrusive intervention, and sometimes ask questions about what the intent is behind the local authority's intervention.
Yes, I thank my right honourable friend for his intervention, and absolutely I agree with him. We are looking to, or the bill is seeking for parents to provide such detailed explanation of what they are planning to do at home with their children that, quite frankly, it's going to hinder the work that they actually do in educating those children. And arguably, some of that information schools are probably not readily providing either. I'm also, though, concerned at the implication in the bill that the state is better at parenting than the parents themselves. The changes in this bill directly contradict Section 7 of the Education Act of 1996, which affirms a parent's legal duty to ensure that their children have an efficient and full-time education through regular school attendance or otherwise. Now, why, you might say, is this important? Because it underscores the principle that parents, not the state, hold primary responsibility for the education of their children, except, I admit, in the minority of cases where there is harm or neglect. So let's not forget that many parents opt to homeschool because the state system has failed their children. And I would really urge caution about the provision of this bill, which is adding further stress to them when they've already had to fight long and hard for their children.
May I applaud my honourable friend for the point that she's making. I too have had representation from excellent homeschooling parents. Does she think there's a way, with reason and understanding on both sides, that a balance can be struck between the need to safeguard the rights of homeschooling by responsible parents and the needs to prevent abuse of children by parents who have got other more sinister objectives?
Yes, I thank my honourable friend for that contribution. I think he's correct. You know, there has to be a middle ground that we could find here. I suggested, didn't I, that we're using a hammer to crack a nut. I don't think a lot of these parents are against having to say something about what they're doing, but to suggest that they have to give absolute chapter and verse to their local authority, who in many cases are going to have failed them already, where that relationship may well have broken down, feels like it's too much of a strike. I'm going to continue to make some progress, if I may, because I won't get any extra time either. The requirements in the bill, therefore, risk hindering families who, for legitimate reasons, and often because of failures in the SEND provision that they have needed, have opted to educate their children in this particular way. So to conclude, I have 3 questions that I'd like to just raise for the government on this. Will the government confirm that the evidence base for this particular part of the bill is founded on accurate data and genuine needs, which I think reflects the questions that my honourable friends have asked already? What assessment has been made of the potential consequences of the bill on home educating families and their ability to provide a tailored high-quality education? And are we actually inadvertently hindering them from doing that? And will the government work to protect the rights of home educators and prioritise the well-being of children over administrative convenience? Now, we've heard all sorts of contributions this afternoon on many of the topics, but for me, I said in my maiden speech, looked after children are one of the key things I wish to speak about, and I believe very strongly in the rights of parents to choose what is best for their children. And I really hope that the government will listen to the contributions from the House today on both of those points, and that we could see some amendments in the next stage of this legislation that would tighten this up and make for an even better piece of legislation.
Jess Assato.
Can I start by thanking my right honourable friend, the Secretary of State for Education, for bringing forward this landmark piece of genuinely transformational legislation. As someone who spent 3 years in the voluntary sector fighting for vulnerable children, I know this bill prioritises children and their needs, righting many of the wrongs of the last 14 years of failure under the Conservatives. This bill signifies a much-needed movement towards preventative services, shamefully slashed by the party opposite. Sure Start, with its huge impact on child development, disappeared. Youth services, decimated. Due to the huge cuts by the party opposite, in England we spend 11 times more on late intervention, and spending on early intervention has fallen by 44% since 2010. The reforms laid out today, coupled with the funding needed to properly realise them, have the potential to ensure that with the right support, more children can remain safely living with their birth families. It should also ensure that when children do need to live with foster parents or in a residential home, we are able to provide them with the best possible care. These children, after all, are the responsibility of the state. We are their parents, and we need to have the same high ambitions for them as we do for our own children. The recognition in this bill that young people need more support when they first leave care must also be celebrated. The bill will help to improve this situation by finally extending staying close to all areas of the country. This was a key recommendation of the independent review of children's social care. However, that review also recommended extending corporate parenting principles so they applied not just to children's services, but to a greater range of public organisations. In November, the government outlined that this important reform would be implemented. So therefore, can the Secretary of State confirm that extending corporate parenting responsibilities remains part of the government's plan to improve support for care leavers? We've also heard about the postcode lottery in the help available for care leavers. The support a young person receives too often depends on where they live, not what they need. That is why I believe that we need a national offer of support. It could include things suggested by children's charity Barnardo's, such as a right to a free bus pass, free prescriptions and help with rental deposits. And finally, like the Children's Commissioner for England, I believe this bill presents an opportunity for this House to finally ensure that children in England, like their counterparts in Scotland and Wales, receive equal protection from assault and battery. We cannot adequately ensure children's welfare if we fail to protect their physical safety and well-being. A 2021 Lancet review of 70 studies found that physical punishment had no positive outcomes for children and was instead linked to greater child behaviour problems over time. The Royal College of Paediatrics and Child Health have also found that children who experience physical punishment are 2.6 times more likely to experience mental health problems and potentially 2.3 times more likely to experience more serious forms of physical abuse. These children are also more likely to believe that violence is an acceptable and normal way of expressing frustration, contributing to a cycle of violence in society that we need to break. And though for many of us physical punishment may seem a relic of the past, data from 2020 to 21 found that more than 1 in 5 10-year-olds have experienced physical punishment, and the NSPCC has seen a 3-fold increase in the number of child welfare calls mentioning physical punishment in the past couple of years. Given 71% of adults believe physical punishment is unacceptable, the time to end this injustice is now. In the context of one child dying every 4 days from deliberately inflicted injuries and the horrific murder of Sarah Sharif, whose father sought to justify her treatment under the dark cloak of discipline, it is clear that the threat of violence children face should no longer be given the pretence of legal cover. This bill does so much for children and young people, and it's my view that by extending corporate parenting, ensuring equal protection and establishing a national care leavers offer, we can do even more to ensure that everyone growing up is given the opportunity to flourish. Thank you.
Rupert Lowe.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Given that the opposition amendment has been accepted, I'm not going to stand here and outline my disgust at what has happened with regard to the historic grooming scandal. The British people want answers, so I'm going to ask questions of the Labour Party, and several of them. Will the government commit to urgently deporting all guilty foreign nationals involved, including family members who were aware of the crimes and therefore complicit? Wives, sisters, mothers, cousins, if they knew and said nothing, these individuals are just as guilty as the rapists themselves. Will the government commit to stripping citizenship from dual nationals implicated and deport them as well? Race or religion must protect nobody. Will the government commit to pausing all Pakistani visas and foreign aid into the country until the Pakistani government agrees to accept any of its deported citizens that have perpetrated these crimes on British soil, and also imprisons these rapists and their accomplices in Pakistan, however they see fit? Will the government undertake a full investigation into officials who had knowledge of these crimes yet failed to act? Establish a specified task force to root out this wicked evil. Don't just fire these vile individuals, prosecute them. How many girls are estimated to have been raped? Is there a tally for the overall number of rapes? Horrifyingly, it may well be in the millions. We just don't know. How many vulnerable young girls are estimated to still be involved in these gangs? If there is no estimate figure, why not? Will a regular update be published detailing ongoing prosecutions and sentencing? Will the government publish a full nationality breakdown of those convicted for such offences, along with the location of their crimes? How many known foreign rapists per town, per region? Will they publish a breakdown of the immigration status of those involved? On what grounds were they in the UK? Do they have previous convictions? How many foreign nationals found guilty have been released but not deported? And how many re-offences... I'm going to carry on if that's right. How many re-offences have occurred since release? How many of these monsters are walking on the same streets as the girls they raped and abused? One report suggested a victim had come face to face with her rapist in a supermarket. Is the government comfortable with that? How many of the foreign rapists were in receipt of any form of state benefit?
Would the honourable member give
I'm going to carry on if that's right. How many released currently receive any state benefit? How many children have been born following a rape from these men? How many have been given access to the child against the mother's wishes? And how many had used the child as a route to remain in the UK? Will the government commit to preventing this in future? How many deportations have been blocked due to the rapist's right to a family life or other ECHR influences? Will the government set up a dedicated, confidential and accessible official process for whistleblowers to safely raise their concerns regarding foreign rape gangs, ensuring it is safe, secure and easy to find? Will the government release all court transcripts relating to these cases so the British people can understand just part of the horror for themselves? How many of these documents have been hidden due to the cost of release? This should not be an obstacle to transparency on these trials. Will lifelong sentences now be considered for those British citizens involved in the crimes, but also those in positions of power who acted to cover up the scale of the abuse? Which politicians, local and national, had knowledge of these events but failed to act? Again, going as far as to actively conceal what was truly happening. These are the facts that the British people want to know and the British people deserve to know. All of these questions have also been submitted in written form, and I look forward to receiving open and transparent answers. The mass rape of young white working class girls by gangs of Pakistani rapists is a rotting stain on our nation. This is not about Elon Musk. This is not a bandwagon of the far right. This is about the victims and ensuring swift and brutal justice is delivered to those demons responsible. It is about distinguishing between right and wrong. I finished.
Sarah Champion.
I want to start by welcoming this bill because it actually does address a lot of the underlying problems that we have within our schools' education and indeed protection of children. I welcome the Secretary of State's commitment to make this a child-centred bill. I've got to say, I feel disgusted by what the Honourable Gentleman has just said. Can you imagine if you're a victim or survivor listening to that? I'm sure his intent is to get to the truth and get justice. But the language, please think about who hears our words. Sorry, everyone. On the 26th of November 2024, in her letter to the chair of the Safeguarding Practice Review Panel, the Secretary of State for Education said, "The forthcoming Children's Wellbeing Bill is a vital mechanism for improving the lives of vulnerable children. There is a renewed government focus on tackling child sexual exploitation, which will necessarily include our response to the ICSA recommendations." I want to take this moment as an opportunity to say to the Secretary of State which of those recommendations falls squarely within this bill, and I hope with cross-party support we can encourage the Secretary of State to adopt them. ICSA actually published 20 recommendations that were trying to address the whole of child sexual abuse in this country, to get support for those victims and survivors, to get early intervention to prevent the crime, but also to get the prosecutions that we all so desperately want. Recommendation 1 was for a core data set. Currently, the bill's single-use identifier number is not the same as a core data set. There is a need for a unified set of data which allows authorities to better understand the prevalence of abuse, identifying patterns and informing evidence-based policy making. What we currently have is a patchy, fragmented data system that hinders effective prevention and intervention. ICSA asked for the creation of a single core data set that includes the characteristics of victims and alleged perpetrators of child sexual abuse, vulnerability factors and the settings and contexts in which the abuse occurs. Recommendation 2 would be for a Child Protection Authority for England and Wales. Recommendation 3, a Cabinet Minister for Child Protection, and that needs to be someone that cuts across all the different departments, because that's where we're failing children right now. We do not have a joint approach when it comes to child protection. Recommendation 4, public awareness campaign, and cultural awareness is included throughout the recommendations. We need to make children aware of the risks that they face, but we also need to tackle cultural insensitivities and much worse wherever we find them. This is one that's particularly pertinent to me because I'm very proud that I got the previous government to make sure every child from primary school had relationship education. However, in September 24, the DfE published an independent evidence review on teaching relationship education to prevent sexual abuse, and it found that still teachers were not receiving the adequate training. There are not the adequate resources for those teachers, and so I urge the Secretary of State to use this bill to do something about it. Specifically, will she ring-fence RHSE training budgets? I will, of course.
Thank you for giving way. A fantastic organisation in my constituency of South Devon called Child Assault Prevention. I worked with them when I was working at Devon Rape Crisis. They had to close their doors 2 years ago because their funding was cut by the previous government, and they were doing really, really vital work with primary school age children, teaching them about the dangers of sexual assault and how to avoid it. So I would really welcome the government looking at reinstating funding to organisations like this who are working in this very sensitive area with young children.
And I would absolutely recommend and echo what she's saying. It's so important. Recommendation 13 is on mandatory reporting. And I was keen to hear the Home Secretary say that this was going to be one of her objectives, but it also needs to cover those in all positions of trust. I'm very, very concerned as well that if we just have mandatory reporting without the resources for the administration to actually act on that, it becomes no more than a tick box exercise, but also the very teachers and training staff that should be protecting children get penalised, worse, prosecuted as a consequence. I would like to say that ICSA took 7 years, cost £186 million. It had over 2 million pages of evidence, 725 witnesses, and over 6,000 victims and survivors put their trust into the process and gave their evidence. They did all of this. We spent all of this money so that the recommendations would be implemented. There was also a Home Office report. Again, I spent a year of my life putting into the Home Office report, which was in 2020, which gave the solutions. I spent 2 years in the ICSA inquiry, specifically around grooming gangs. The recommendations haven't been adopted. So I say, with the deepest respect to all of those calling for a national inquiry, rather than that, put all of your energy in getting these recommendations adopted. Because with the best will in the world, and you all know me, I'm not making a party political point here, with the best will in the world, another inquiry will mean another 10 years of waiting. And what I want to see, and I truly believe we all want to see, is child protection right now, including the... So I urge, please, members, consider what you're doing. Use the report as the time to make the amendments to get the changes you want.
Sir Gavin Williamson.
Deputy Speaker. There are two sides to this bill. Indeed, it could very easily have been two bills and would have maybe been a stronger piece of legislation if it had been dealt with as two bills. And on one aspect, I'd like to commend the government in terms of children's well-being, and so much that is part of that bill, I think, is very good and very commendable. It's wonderful to see the building up of work that's been done in terms of Staying Close programme that is already demonstrating positive results, and the evidence there is showing the impact that it has on people's lives. And I was delighted to see that much of the work that was undertaken by the Honourable Member for Workington and Whitehaven when he was commissioned to do the report under the last government has been embraced and taken as part of this and is being built upon. I'm also delighted to see the work that has been done in terms of fostering and kinship care. We know that this has such a positive impact on so many young people's lives, and it's good to see that as part of the bill. However, the other side of the bill, in terms of schools, is an area that I think does raise very serious concerns. As was said by the government, it said that the current discrepancy between maintained schools and academies leaves potential for inconsistencies in education standards, opportunities and outcomes for pupils from different types of schools. And it's an interesting point, because actually as you look through this legislation, if you look through the clauses, it doesn't seem to be about making sure that excellence within our schooling system is actually driven forward. It seems to be about dragging the excellent down. And if I may take the chance to go through some clauses, and maybe even the ministers could take the time to actually make themselves familiar with some of those clauses. Because actually, if you look at section 45 of the bill, ending academy schools' freedom over pay. You know, the idea that academy schools are using that freedom anything other than to attract the best teachers and the specialists that they sometimes need in order to be able to get the very best for their pupils is crazy. Of course, I'll give way to the honourable gentleman.
And I'm grateful to the honourable member for giving way. Is it not the case that there are some multi-academy trusts that in respect of sick pay offer terms and conditions after 6 weeks that are only a little above the statutory minimum? And if a teacher does fall seriously ill, they should have access to the same protections as are available to any other teachers.
What this bill does is remove academies' ability to do more for teachers. If you take the ARC Academy Trust, on average, they're paying 2.5% on every single national pay point for their teachers. What academies have done, where they've got areas of specialism, they've used that as an opportunity to pay more to bring the very best of teachers in. And then as we progress through, if we look at clause 50, it's giving the school's adjudicator the power to set published admission numbers of the school, including academies, giving the local authority greater influence over the PANS, the public admission numbers for schools in their area. In reality, and this is going to see the very best schools lose out on the ability to expand rapidly, to offer more children the opportunity to come to the very best school. And this is increasingly important in a time when we're actually seeing overall pupil numbers starting to decline. We're seeing the best schools having less opportunity to offer more spaces to pupils within their community. And if we look at clause 44, the bill repeals the requirement to turn failing local authority schools into academies. We already have a great deal of ambiguity where you have failing schools. What is the government going to do about those failing schools? It's not been made clear as to the changes of Ofsted. The powers of Ofsted have been watered down. And this will mean failing schools continue to exist. There will be no change. I'll give way to my right honourable friend.
And does he agree with me that ministers need to set out how failing schools will be tackled, because we cannot have a system in which children are left in a school which is letting them down without immediate action. And that's what the previous Academies programme brought about.
My right honourable friend is absolutely correct. There is total silence as to what is going to happen. There is no sense that where you have a school that is failing, action is going to be taken to make sure that we have successful academy change taking over those schools and driving improvements in those schools. But what we have heard from the government since it's come in is about getting rid of excellence. A number of programmes that I was very proud to see introduced, whether it's the Latin Excellence Programme, whether it's rolling out the ability to have more cadet forces in schools, where the evidence points to the fact that this has a real impact in terms of children's attainment, often children from the most disadvantaged backgrounds. These programmes are just scrapped. There's a sense that what we want to do is have a homogenous school system where brilliance and excellence and freedom for teachers and for schools to deliver the very best for their pupils is stamped out, and the sense that the minister knows best, that Whitehall is the master, is what is going to drive our education system forward. There is many aspects of this bill that is positive when it comes to that children's well-being aspects of it. But I urge the Minister to look at those other aspects that systemically destroy the progress that has been made by both Labour governments and Conservative governments in terms of driving academic excellence forward, driving schools to be able to offer some of the things that private schools have, but the state school previously hadn't. I certainly know at my comprehensive school, the idea that you could join a cadet force or you could learn Latin, that was just not available. This is about dumbing down. It's not about raising aspiration. It's not about raising excellence.
Minofa.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. This is actually a bill which will ensure that every child growing up in this country will have the best possible start in life and break down the barriers to opportunity. And like the honourable member opposite, I also went to a comprehensive, and also I believe in comprehensive state-run education should be excellent, and that's why I support this bill. I would also say that every teacher I spoke to before the election was cheesed off with what was happening in education. And that's one of the reasons I got involved in this, because they were so depressed about what they were doing. And also, every teacher I've spoke to who has read this bill is in support of it. So surely we should be listening to those. Can I answer a couple of other quick things first? Can I just say that in terms of mental health, something that was raised by a colleague, an honourable member. Actually, this government is going to bring a mental health work into every school. It's not in this bill. This is about the Department of Health. And I believe that we will transform that. Did I actually say you could give way? But look, go on then. After you. Yeah.
I think he's very kind second time round. I think he just said the new government was going to bring a mental health work into each school. Could he just repeat that for the avoidance of doubt?
That is our manifesto commitment. And can I also say that one of the reasons I am here is because a child in my constituency under the last Tory government had to wait 6 months following a suicide attempt at school, and that is simply not acceptable. So that's all I would say. The other thing I would also say is, in terms of the curriculum review, we need to expand the curriculum. Every teacher I spoke to has said this. We need to improve the arts, music, and this will in itself improve well-being. But I would also like to just, rather less controversially, just concentrate on clause 22 regarding the provision of free breakfast clubs. So I have been a GP for the last 30 years, and I understand that health and education are inextricably linked. We cannot learn when we are hungry, and I think free breakfast clubs will ensure that every child, irrespective of their background, has the foundation they need to start the day. And also, there's a very strong evidence around obesity. Obesity is a massive problem in our children, and it's harming their well-being. 10% of children entering reception are obese, and at year 6, 22% are obese. So free breakfast clubs will reduce that as well. And the other thing I would be very keen to encourage is that, in Stroud, we've been working really closely with local primary schools, and this is about getting local food that's nutritious into the school diet and not relying on national companies doing that. And we have a commitment to try and procure 50% of that food from the local agricultural community. And I am very, very proud of this. And the other thing about breakfast clubs is that it's really important that children eat together. And that's what we used to do at our primary school. And it fosters a feeling of well-being as well. And the Long Table in Stroud is an organisation that encourages that. So can I just say one other thing about breakfast clubs? Now, something we need to be careful of is of the food industry. The food industry lobby is incredibly powerful, and they have been providing free food for these breakfast clubs. And all I would say is there's no such thing as a free breakfast. These companies are trying to promote their own products, and we must be very, very wary of them as well. I'll be very brief now as well. I want to just talk about free school meals. There's quite a lot of evidence that free school meals reduces obesity, and I would support their universal rollout, not just in Wales and in London. And in London, there has been a reduction in obesity levels and improvements in learning as well. So let's really work for that when the conditions allow. And I also think, as an interim, we should go for auto-enrolment for free school meals, because that will improve the funding for schools, and it will also enable about 400,000 children to receive free school meals. So I just want to conclude by commending the government committing to ensure every child has the opportunity to thrive. The Children's Wellbeing and School Bill is a bold step towards addressing inequalities and improving the lives of the next generation. But introducing free breakfast clubs, this government is not only tackling hunger, but also investing in health and education. So I urge my honourable friends, do not get waylaid by these political things that are going on around this bill. This is an excellent bill and we need to support it. Thank you.
To ensure that as many colleagues can get in and not many are then disappointed for not getting in, we're going to reduce the speaking limit to 4 minutes. And next I call Vicky Slade.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I shall go as quickly as I can because I've timed it to 5. The death of Sarah Sharif shocked us all, and as my honourable friend for Woking said before recess, we have the opportunity to change the law so that her legacy is that she is the last vulnerable child to be killed by the people who should have looked after her. We often recall the names of Victoria Colombier and baby Peter Connolly, but there are so many